Okay, hi. I've had a few people reach out asking how the doctorate is going, what the first year was like, so I thought I'd put it all into one video, answer a few questions people have sent me. If there's anything left, at the end of the video, put another question in the comments and I'll respond to that. So if you're thinking of doing a doctorate degree in counselling psychology, especially in the UK, I'm doing a doctorate in counselling psychology at City University of London. I'm in year one, or at least I've just finished, so I'll be starting year two in October. This is going to be a summary of what it's been like, so hopefully if you're thinking of doing this type of course, this will be helpful. If you're specifically thinking of applying to City, it'll be even more relevant, but I think it will be relevant to anyone who is doing this kind of course. So let's just get into it. How time-consuming has the doctorate been for you? Have you been able to work part-time if needed, or do you know any colleagues on the program who work part-time as well as complete placements and the doctorate full-time? I'd say what I would advise is the same as what the university advises, which is to work as little as possible, meaning work that you're doing outside of your placement or university itself. Try and do as little as possible. Now, unfortunately, this is not realistic for the majority of people because this course and any course of this kind in the UK is not funded. So especially if you're an international student, you're going to most likely need to work to make things more comfortable for you. So I personally have been working. I try and limit it because it just means, if you've pre-committed to work outside of university, your placement might get more intense because you get more clients. The doctorate work itself will get more intense. So, and if you don't have a good gauge for when that's going to happen, then it's hard to pre-plan what paid work you can do and not do. One tip I would say around that is, at least for year one, the first term was much lighter than term 2 and 3. The end of term 2 and most of term 3, very intense in terms of the academic work. So I would really try and limit the amount of work you're doing outside of university or placement if you can. I know this is all ideal scenario kind of situation, but that's what I would do. So what have I been doing? So I've been doing online coaching for people with limerence, and that is fully online work, and I can adjust exactly how much I can work in the coming weeks. So I'm very fortunate to be able to tailor what I'm going to do in terms of my work. For other people, it might not be so flexible just because you have to do a whole shift and give notice, etc. So just try and think of that in advance and try to speak to your employer about that flexibility that you need. And also keep in mind that first term being a lot lighter than the other 2 terms. So if it is possible, front load the work into the first term, even though that will still make things more intense, as you might imagine. In terms of what my peers have done, quite a lot of people are working, so outside of the placement, outside of university work. So it's not uncommon, but again, people do find it intense because you are on a full-time doctorate. There is no part-time option for this degree, at least at City. So even a part-time job, you're taking a part-time job plus a full-time doctorate, which includes placement, 1 day, full day uni, and then you've got the university work, of course, prepare for things, recover, and maybe do other work that you want to do, and then you have your weekends. So you're going to have to think about how much you're willing to sacrifice in terms of your personal time. So yeah, keep that in mind. In terms of the quality of education, do you think there is enough depth in the topics and training in counselling psychology? Are the CBT, humanistic, and psychodynamic modules focused mostly on theory, or do you get to apply those models? So I would say the first year is geared towards even people who haven't had academic training in counselling or counselling psychology or clinical psychology. So it is aimed at bringing everyone up to that level. So you might feel at times that the theory is not deep enough. I would say this changes the later you get in the terms. So at first it might feel lighter. So for example, in the research methods module, the first one might feel lighter than in the second term, mostly not because of the lectures, but actually because of the work you need to do for the assignment. So for CBT, personally, I did think the lectures felt quite light in terms of the theory, but the expectations for the assignment were very high. By the way, everything I've fed back to the university through my representatives, so we all have representatives on the course and they represent us to the staff, so they should be aware of everything that I mentioned. You may feel like some of the theory that you learn in the lectures are not as deep, but that doesn't mean they don't expect you to do a lot of extra work to pass the assignments. I will touch on passing assignments later because that's a big thing that I had to adjust to. So yes, I would say lectures may feel light for some. The exception to that for me was psychodynamic, which was a lot heavier. Very interesting for me, the most interesting module. And the professional standards lectures were also quite detailed, and the assignment I found tough. Do you get to apply these models? For CBT, you do a lot of practice within the lectures, meaning you do lectures and then the second half you might have a practice hour where you get put into a dyad or a triad, so you're practicing with your peers a specific technique, just demonstrating that you know how to respond to something using a CBT methodology. So for the others, for psychodynamic, that doesn't apply because it's just not possible to do the types of things that you do in psychodynamic work in a session or in practice in that way. So that is expected to happen in later years. So most people do not do a psychodynamic placement in their first year. They do it second year or later because of the amount of theory that's required to do it and a lot of supervision. So you get supervision in any methodology, by the way. So for humanistic, yes. So person-centered, we did get to do workshops or work in pairs, not as much as CBT, but I don't feel it was as necessary. CBT is tool-specific, very method-specific, has defined ways of working if you are using it more purely. So it made sense that it would be more working in groups, practicing those methods. The research modules are pretty much all about the assignment itself, though we did have some workshops where people who were doing qualitative were in one group, quantitative in another, and mixed methods in another, to help us prepare for writing our research proposal, which was the assignment for that module. How has it been living in London and completing the program, keeping in mind the expense, but also the individualistic nature of London and the issue with a sense of community? How has it been for you so far? Okay, that's a good question because, yeah, that is generally what it's like in London, I'd say. People are very much in their own lane, doing their own thing. And as much as I feel Londoners do want to reach out, find new people to be connected with, I think they don't want to be the one to instigate. So you do have to do a lot of the work if you are looking to meet new people, make new friends, create community. I think that is just generally London. If you've experienced London before, you can expect more of the same. I lived in London for many years before I started the doctorate. I love London. That wasn't a negative for me. It's something I'm used to. Now, if you're coming from a different country and you have nobody that you know in the UK or in London, that might be more challenging for sure. I think the good thing about the doctorate in our cohort, and I would recommend this for your year if you do get onto City, is to create a WhatsApp group very quickly and put everyone in it. Hey, I want to keep in touch. Even before, actually, we set up the WhatsApp group before the course started. We managed to do that, just word of mouth, and that made a huge difference. Our cohort actually is very cohesive. I feel comfortable speaking to anyone in my cohort, and I hope they feel the same towards me. So that, I will say, is a huge help, and I don't think that has been the case every year of the doctorate, because I've heard, at least word of mouth, that other years have not felt that way and they do not have that sense of community. And perhaps that changes in year 2 onwards, but in the first year, I think we've been cohesive. We go to the pub together at the end of the lecture day. So in the first year, it's been Wednesdays all day, 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. We go to the pub, we just hang out. I think that's a really nice feature of our cohort. Okay, some other programs emphasize social justice issues, qualitative research, and spirituality. City seems a lot more cut and dry. Would this be a fair assessment? Why or why not? By cut and dry, I mean more scientifically oriented and lacking in community-based teaching of our understanding of psychology. When it comes to social justice issues, diversity, that kind of thing, that's very much embedded throughout the modules. They always kind of take that angle, so you're not going to miss on that. I would also say that the professional standards module is quite tailored to that as well. When it comes to community learning, actually the professional standards module continues into term 2, and that has a component called experts by experience, where you have people who have used services in the UK as service users, so they've had some mental health difficulties, either current or in the past, and they are expressing kind of what it was like going through it, the systems, and what we might learn from them as people who are using the services that we would be working in the future. So I would say that is the more community-based learning. But when it comes to considering community and considering diversity and all the rest, I think that is very much a slant throughout the course. So it might not be highlighted as an individual module, but I would say we talk about it regularly. How has the course changed your viewpoint of mental health? Has it changed it or not really? Has it changed my viewpoint on mental health? I don't know if it has. I was quite post-diagnostic before I joined the course, meaning not very much into ascribing labels to people, saying you have this disorder rather than that disorder or a combination. Even though those things can be helpful, I realized that it's much more about the individual and formulating. Keep in mind the psychometrics and the more diagnostic elements, I think, are coming in year 2. So perhaps that will change. But I think the general ethos in counseling psychology, that as I've understood it, is that we're much more individualistic and less interested in creating labels to reduce people's experiences, to make it easier to put them in a box. That's not to say that it's wrong to do so always. I don't believe that either. But I would say that's been emphasized through the first year of the course. I guess one other thing that it's changed is my ideas around resourcefulness. What mitigating factors are going to help people through a mental health experience that might be difficult. So the people around them, their family, their own grit and perseverance. How can you tap into that? How can you appreciate that in a way that people can feel powerful? Because they're going to be the ones living their own lives after you stop seeing them as a therapist. So being able to foster that is going to be powerful because they're not going to be dependent on you. The goal is for them not to need you eventually. What has your experience been like in learning from lecturers and the professors? Do you consider the professors to be good? Yes, so I think the lecturers are good. They're all experienced, very knowledgeable. I think in terms of the lectures themselves, it's hard to make everyone happy, I suppose. I can see a lot of my peers who were more experienced, some of them already were practitioners in other countries, finding it too simple, the lectures to begin with, but still finding the assignments difficult. So there was that disparity that I was talking about earlier. I think if you are going to go directly to your lecturer asking for direction about something or asking a probing question, I think they are all knowledgeable, so you should feel confident about that. Though I will say, unless you really push for it, I don't know if this will change next year because of the feedback we've given, you might feel like the lectures in the first year don't go into that much detail. Keep in mind, they're trying to cover all the bases, because one thing I should have mentioned earlier as well is that if you leave the doctorate in the first year, you leave with a master's degree. So if you complete the first year, but you don't continue to year 2 and 3, you leave with a master's degree. And master's degrees need to have a grade ascribed to them. So pass, merit, or distinction. And you need to have like marks for that. Your essay can't just be pass, fail. It has to be numerical or percentage. That is what's going to happen in the first year. That's kind of a tough one because, at least in my experience and those peers I've spoken to about it, it's much harder from what I expected from my previous master's degree, much harsher marking, in my opinion, and harder to get higher marks. So I think that might lead to a kind of personal crisis if you find that to be important for you. But I think that's good. That's part of the transformation through this course. You realize that this is much less about being perfectionistic or how you compare to others or having the validation of your lecturers and professors. It's much more about getting the job done well, and this is an ongoing journey. It is not complete, it is not full yet. You are always learning, you are always progressing. Now, I made it sound easier than it is. It is difficult, actually. I think, at least I found it difficult to adjust to these new levels. But yeah, going back to how have you found the lecturers? I think one-to-one as well, you'll be surprised by how much more you can get out of speaking to your lecturers one-to-one. Being very close with your tutor, that was important for me. She was excellent and really made the first year much more enjoyable, I think, than it would have been without her. So yes, I would say don't just leave it at the lecture. If you expect more, you can go and ask for more. You can also give feedback. Maybe not wait until later in the course to give the feedback. We perhaps waited too late. We waited until the end of the module. I guess we could have asked, because it's all a work in progress, right? I'm sure they're still making adjustments to the course, still figuring out what works. Give the feedback early if you can. Are the research modules and the professors that teach them thorough? So research modules is a bit of a difficult one. I would say because they want to cover all bases, it does not get particularly detailed in my view. we kind of breeze through everything. And so you have a passing understanding of everything. Statistics, we do basically nothing in this year. I think the reason for this is that all the depth in terms of your learning is going to come through your thesis, through your own research project. So for that, you're going to deep dive into your own research, understand exactly what you need to know for your research project. Also keep in mind the amount that they need to cover in this type of course is vast. And so doing that, not just covering the breadth, but also going in depth is quite difficult. Again, if you are finding it not as stimulating as you'd want it to be, you should give that feedback early. I think that's one thing I would have done differently this year, is to just say early on, does anyone else feel this way? Because I was expecting XYZ, could we get more of this? So for research methods, I guess don't expect to become a research methods expert. I mean, of course, in the first year, but you should be geared up to start looking at the methodology you're going to use for your research project. And so if you do not feel supported in that regard, then certainly you should reach out. You get your supervisor maybe end of term 2, early term 3, and then you'll have someone specific to talk to. You're mostly preparing yourself for writing the research proposal, and of course you can reach out to your tentative supervisor until then. I say tentative because I think it can change, and then you build on that in the second year, I believe. What have been the pros and cons of the Counselling Psychology Doctorate at City University of London? I guess it's kind of hard to know which are general pros and cons of doing this type of course in the UK. I'll say that these are specific to City from my experience, because that's the only one I have experience in. But I have heard similar experiences at other universities in the UK and in London. Not only that, similar courses in clinical psychology in the UK, also similar issues. So actually, I think some of them are just inherent difficulties of running this type of course. So you may find similar issues elsewhere anyway, so be prepared for that. So the pros. I think the pros are that you just get everything in one place. With regards to training in the UK, it's ambiguous as to what you need exactly to be a therapist, to be a counsellor, to be a psychologist, etc. So to be a counselling psychologist, similar to training to be a clinical psychologist, your course equips you to do everything. And once you're out, you don't have to worry about what do I need to do to practice. You're very much ready to practice by that point. That does not mean that your training ends. That does not mean that your learning ends. But if you do just a certificate in counselling in the UK, what does that equip you for? It really depends who it's accredited by, how many hours are included, if you get practical experience, all of that. And that's really variable and difficult to understand. So that is a really big pro. The other thing for me is being connected to people who are like-minded. I have found the group to be open-minded, open to discussions, and actually quite controversial topics as well. Today we're aware of topics in a way that makes a conversation stifling or difficult to disagree with each other. The staff were open to having those conversations too. So, and that included disagreements with the staff. So I would say that's a big pro, because if we can't be open-minded as psychologists, I don't know who we expect to be open-minded, really. Another pro is the breadth. Even though I get a feeling of where I'm slanting towards, probably psychodynamic or humanistic, you get exposed to everything. You'll want to focus on your own modality specifically, because you'll start to realize, hey, I like this way of working more than that. In the first year, I would say that changes. I've seen a lot of people change from, purely CBT interested to being more interested in psychodynamic, etc. So that kind of thing you can look forward to, that shift of understanding, and you'll also be exposed to that other modality, of course. Now, it's more up to you to go into more detail to understand how that modality works, especially in first year, because they're just trying to cover as much as they can. But I would say that's another pro, is that it's not limited to any specific modality. You get a bit of everything. The big ones, of course, are CBT, person-centered, systemic, and psychodynamic. Those are the ones you'll be exposed to via the doctorate. But schema therapy is, I think there's a member of staff who specializes in that. They will be running, I think, a supervision group. And so even more variety there. I don't think that one's guaranteed. I think that's just because a few of us showed interest in that, and they may be setting that up for us next year. So cons. I think cons are difficult to gauge what is required of you in the assignments and what level you'll be expected to perform at to get specific grades. Now, eventually, to give you the shortcut to the learning from this, for me and for many of my peers, because we talk about it a lot, is passing is good enough. And I've heard this from clinical psychology trainees. I've heard this from counselling. It seems to be that a hallmark of the experience of adjusting to this kind of course is passing is good enough. I think in clinical psychology, it's always pass-fail. And then, of course, it becomes more about dealing with failure if you do fail. But because we get the grades, the numerical grades I talked about, because some people will get the masters if they leave, they have to give us all marks for the first year. In second year, third year, you don't see any marks, it's pass-fail. So there you're more naturally inclined to just be like, it just needs to be good enough. But of course, what's good enough will differ, I think, from what you might expect. I would say the expectation is much higher than I thought it would be, and certainly compared to my previous postgraduate education. Another con for me is time. This is a very expensive, time-consuming course, and just kind of keeping up with that is quite difficult. It's really a labor of love if you're doing this course. A lot of self-sacrifice, and of course you're supporting people who need your help, and you have to both know that there are limits to that, you know, not to have any grandiosity when it comes to that, but also make sure that you are equipped to help them. You know, you're not burnt out. You're not going to not turn up for work or something, or, you know, you're being relied on, as well as being put through a very difficult course and lifestyle. Another con I'd say is just because of the amount that they try to cover in this first year, depth with regards to the lectures and the types of conversations we have might not be as deep as you would expect them to. You would have to push for that, ask the questions in the lectures, make sure those conversations are happening. But we did end up having some of those conversations. I wish we'd pushed that much earlier, I suppose, maybe with more specific debates or case studies that we would analyze. And one other small one is that we could have done more in terms of case studies with regards to professional standards. Actually, so that professional standards happens in term 1 and 2. In term 1, you do an essay exam. So it's like 4 questions. How would you deal with this? And what are the issues? What's the policies and regulations? Like, how as a counseling psychologist do you respond to this? And I wish we'd just done that for both of the terms. So kind of a repeat, but more advanced. For me, the expert by experience lectures could have been replaced with, I guess, more group supervision or people bringing their own cases forward. I do think it's important to listen to service users. I just thought for the amount of time that we dedicated to the lectures that we could have used more of that to practice case studies or to speak in group supervision where we share stories about service users, or more documented versions of listening to service users' stories. Yeah, so I'll sum up a bit of how it's been a mixed bag. Like, it's a mixed bag in terms of, okay, you think, well, I'm going to do a doctorate, so I'm going to be, you know, learned in everything, I'm going to understand everything, be able to do everything. And the reality is you're still going to yourself have to decide what you're going to focus on, what you're going to give more energy to, and who you want to be as a counseling psychologist, because that can look different for different people. You will then have to make that decision and push for that development. So you can't expect it all to be pre-packaged for you, and then they'll have your specific version of what kind of counseling psychologist you want to be, or you're going to be trained to be. Instead, you are discovering that, and you then need to make the choices. How am I going to get that experience? How am I going to get exposed to the right kinds of either services or, you know, training in order to support people in the way that I want to? The other thing is, it's a big lifestyle change wherever you come from. I don't think anyone has found it particularly comfortable, whether it's working full-time beforehand or just studying or part-time. Going into a full-time doctorate with a placement that you do at least 1 day a week, a full day of lectures, and preparing for that 1 day of lectures. The pre-reading is quite extensive. If you want to cover all of it, eventually, you know, you have to pick and choose what you're going to do and not do. And then also supporting yourself financially, all really difficult to balance. So that one is, yeah, something you're going to have to expect, to be honest. I think another good thing is you're really treated like someone who is able to do a lot already. And I think that gives you confidence, because they believe you can actually do all this. It's not just, hey, if you pass this with flying colors, maybe I'll think about you for my research project or whatever. I felt that everyone is quite respectful and thinks of you on the same level, you know, as a professional, which is really great. And they take your opinions in that way. So if you've been in education before that, you might know that that's not always the case. It's very much once you go through this hoop and once you've got this accreditation, once you've got this, then we'll take you seriously. But I think they take you seriously from the beginning in the doctorate. I would say put yourself forwards. Don't expect things to happen naturally. If you need something, you need to ask for it. If you're not getting enough of something, remember you're paying for an extremely expensive course, and you've got to be empathic to the people who are creating this course as well, running it, because it's no mean feat, for sure. It's a very difficult thing to do. So they're trying to make things better for you, but you will have to communicate any of those things to your staff, and especially your tutor is a great person to talk to. Right, so I hope that was useful. Let me know in the comments if you have any other questions or would like me to do another video, and I'll get around to it. Cool. Look after yourself.